We hope you enjoy this podcast. All our conversations are inspired by films we have selected to appear on SDG.vision. So go and take a look and be inspired by people and organisations who are making valuable contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals and making our world a better place for everybody to live. Now, sit back, enjoy, be inspired, and afterwards, go and take action.
Well, welcome to Mattias Olsson from Campfire Stories to the SDG Vision podcast. Mattias, hello.
Hello.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you.
I think
Likewise.
You're based in Sweden, somewhere in Sweden.
I am based in Sweden, in a small, in the countryside outside of a small town called Järna, which is about maybe 40 minutes south of Stockholm, the capital. So it's kind of countryside. By the time you get that far out of the capital, it's all barns and cows and stuff like that.
Oh, it sounds lovely. Sounds lovely. And you're just about to enter the winter months, which I imagine it gets a bit nippy out there, a bit cold out there.
It's true. And the cold doesn't bother me so much, but the dark.
Yeah.
I just noticed this morning that my alarm clock is set for 7, and usually that's fine. But it wasn't yet light at 7, so I didn't really feel like getting up.
Yeah.
And then I commented to my wife that it's like really not fair that one should have to get up when the sun is not up. So, but then she commented back that if we stick with that, then you'd like in a few months' time you'd be getting up at like 9:30 in the morning and then going to bed at like 3:30 in the afternoon. So
yeah, well, we don't want that because we want to see more films from you and from Campfire Stories. So yes, you must be disciplined on that, Mattias. So that's
all
terrific.
right. I'll do my best.
Of course, wonderful. We got to know about you and Campfire Stories from a film that we put up on SDG Vision called Rewilding a Forest. And we were quite captivated by it. It's a story of a woman who is slowly bringing back to life again, a forest that she lives in, and she's an artist and a poet. And it was really rich, both in terms of visually, but also the story that it told. And so we were absolutely captivated, as I said. And so we thought we need to investigate further. And we looked at your website and we thought, well, a lot of what you do as a filmmaker and storyteller really chimes with, we think, with the Sustainable Development Goals and what we do at SDG Vision. So perhaps we could start off, Mattias, by you telling us what is Campfire Stories.
First of all, just about that film, the title is actually Once Upon a Forest. But then once you get into the YouTube game, you need to put a title, and you have to think about what are the search words people are going to put in.
Of course.
So it's I don't know how to get out of that way of thinking, but one way is to not be so YouTube dependent, which is why I have the website also. And the website Campfire Stories, it's I like to compare it to Netflix. Everybody knows what Netflix is. So it's exactly the same, except if you think of Netflix as the supermarket at the edge of town that has everything, Campfire Stories is more like, you're going down a gravel road and suddenly there's a fruit and vegetable stand and it's like locally produced stuff, and you can there's a little jar that you put the coins to buy the cucumbers and tomatoes and stuff. So but other than that minor difference, it's exactly like Netflix. There's about 25 film titles up there right now, and about maybe 13 or 15 podcast episodes. So it is more of a boutique, I suppose, than the supermarket. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Boutique, but with a theme. So like Netflix is pretty random in terms of not random, but pretty obvious really in terms of what you'll find on there. But with you, I don't think it is. But I think there's a theme that runs through. The films are very different and the podcasts are very different in terms of subject material. But there seems to be a theme. Is that evident? Well, presumably it's evident to you as well. What would you say that theme is that runs through it all?
I would say the theme is, so if one thinks of the world as heading in a very dangerous direction, if we take that as a statement that we can get behind. That's the first step, I guess. If we don't get behind that, then it's more difficult for me to explain what Campfire Stories is. But if you think that we're heading in a dangerous direction, and that we could be heading in a better direction, let's say, and then you imagine, well, what can I do? I'm just one person out of, I keep losing track of how many billion we are on the planet, but let's say 8 billion or something. So I'm just one person. What does it matter because we're told sort of by the, if you engage in caring for the environment, you're kind of told that, well, you need to not fly, you need to eat less meat and eat more locally produced food, and recycle your recyclables, and take the bike if you can, and those are kind of the 5 things that everybody knows about. And then after that it goes blank, and then maybe somewhere down the list is like, well, vote is important, but you can feel it in the call to action, which is voting. It's kind of, well, it is just one vote and there's all these people. So we're sort of told between the lines, or not even between the lines, that there's nothing really that you can do. Just, do your best and be a nice person, but there's nothing really that you can do. And I like to challenge that. I think there is something that we can do. I think there are many things we can do. And I feel like, yes, it's important with political leadership. Yes, it's important that you vote for a party that you think is heading in a better direction. Those things are important. But I think it's also important, what do I do? How do I live my life? How am I with my family? How do I interact with my children? All of these things matter. And it's difficult to quantify that. It's difficult to put it in a spreadsheet and say, well, if you do this, then the outcome will be that. And the reason that it's so hard, part of the reason is that we're used to measuring things the next day or the next month, or within a political term of, like, say, 4 years. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, it's a little bit blurry. Like, we don't measure things over generations to come, or generations past. But that's where part of the challenge of what I'm trying to do comes into the picture. I have no clue how. I mean, if I spend time with my daughter in the garden planting potatoes and talking to her about that, and I tell her that you cannot have a smartphone because you're 12, and I think it would be damaging to you in many ways, and not just saying you can't have it, but explaining it and talking about it, and a multitude of other things. There's no way for me to know what kind of effect that will have in 30 years. So it's an assumption that what I do is important, and I think that what I do will have big effects, just like rings on the water, over time. Yeah. And that goes for positive action and negative action. So it'll have an impact down the road. There was one more thing I was going to say to close that thing out, but I lost it. But I'll probably come back to it.
No, I'm sure we'll get there. I'm sure we'll find it. But I mean, it's almost sort of be the change that you want to see, isn't it? It's a phrase that we sometimes hear, and it strikes me, and looking at your website, it seems to me that you feel that the process is as important as the end result, or actually it influences getting to the end result. And as you said, those small changes, they may seem small, but as you say, we don't know the impact of our actions and behaviour on other people, and how they're seeing us, and perhaps them adopting some of the things that we're doing. Would that be a fair sort of summation, really, of your philosophy and approach?
Sure. And I found the other thing I wanted to add, so I'll throw that in there now as well, which is that even if it doesn't, like I said, it's an assumption that what I do will have effects down the line and in a generation's time, or in 2 or 3 generations' time. And even if it doesn't, and even if it actually does not matter what I do, because I actually am only one person, I think it's a wonderful experiment to live your life as if what I do really, really matters. Why? Because it might matter. I don't know. So it could be true. It could end up being true. And two, even if it's not true, it's sort of the alternative to being feeling handcuffed by just the dread of the news and just feeling like you don't want to get up in the morning, maybe feeling depressed, maybe even like if it goes really bad, maybe you just have to be on medication just to get through your day. And if we're a population of people on medication so that we can get through the day, that doesn't bode well for creating change. So just, yeah, I get up in the morning and I'm excited to go work on these films, and I just treat them as if they matter deeply. And so there's a difference. I'm not saying they matter deeply. I'm saying I treat them as though they matter deeply. And that's very close now to the bullseye of what Campfire Stories is all about.
Interesting. And how do you source these films? How do you... I was interested to hear another element that we really liked about your approach is that you're pretty much a sort of a local filmmaker. You're not totally restrict yourself to Sweden, because I think you've been out to... I think one of the podcasts I heard was in England or somewhere. But I like the fact that you're looking around you in your, not immediate locality necessarily, but in Sweden. So how do you source those inspirational films or people to film?
Yeah, I think there's an image of a documentary filmmaker being sort of an adventurer with like a backpack and a camera, and you're supposed to go like through a jungle somewhere to some exotic place to capture an exotic story. Sort of like National Geographic back in the day sort of thing. And I try to be that, except here. So I try to imagine that I just arrived here from Japan or somewhere, looking around like, oh my God, look at the landscape, like just trying to see it with fresh eyes. And it's an exercise, of course, but it's an exercise that opens up things for me. And it opens up just hearing story. I mean, I don't know where I pick up these stories, but the one that you liked with the woman living in the forest, making poetry from twigs. I heard her on the radio, and she has the most... So the film that you're referring to is in English, but when she speaks Swedish, she has this beautiful dialect, which is just so exquisite. And the way she uses the words, it's like spells. Her sentences are like poetry. And I was just so drawn to it. And I think there was maybe a phone number on her website, and I was able to reach her husband or partner and pleading my case and saying, this was before. I've actually made a few other films with her before this one. So this was for the first one called A Tale from the Woods, and which I also recommend wholeheartedly. But he was like, no, we don't want to, like I couldn't sell my case somehow. But I kept working. It was a film on clear-cutting sorrow. Just the I don't know if clear-cutting is a big problem in the UK, but in Sweden it's horrible. The logging companies are just taking down everything. Yeah. And so just seeing a clear cut kind of grabs you by the throat or gives you a pit in the stomach. But then you go on the website, or you see the ads, and the forestry companies are saying that they're doing something great for the environment, and this is a beautiful way, or that they're doing a service. And so you get conflicted. And so the film starts in that sense of being conflicted about, well, what's true, what's going on? Should I just dismiss this feeling that I get when I get this pit in my stomach? So the film was to dissolve that pit and to find people who could explain how forestry could be done differently. And so by the end of shooting that film, I was like, I must have this woman in the film. So I called back, which that's kind of rude. Somebody already said no politely, and so I called back and I was like, I'm so sorry. I don't usually do this, but can I plead my case one more time, please? And we ended up talking, and they said, all right, come on over, and we had some tea, and we ended up filming. And it was the beginning of a relationship where I've filmed with them several times, and they've now been in maybe 3 of my films, and this one that you've seen and liked was the last one. And we tried doing it in English, and I thought, well, the magic of our language might get lost in translation, and somehow mysteriously it didn't, which I was so happy about. And the film has now 700,000 views on YouTube, which is incredible.
My goodness, really, that's fantastic. That's extraordinary. That's really testimony to your work, I think. There's another one I saw, which is very different, Imprint, which I think it's 13 projects in 13 different places. I think most of them they're in Sweden, aren't they? I think all of those as well. And it's sort of activism in different parts of Sweden, which I think I would highly recommend as well. I think is terrific. And I love what you said about opening your eyes to where you live and seeing things that you ordinarily during your everyday routines wouldn't see. And I think that is really, really important for everybody, you know. Here at SDG Vision, we're sort of more and more thinking that actually this shift that we need to a better world, a more just world, a better world for the planet and people, we do need a shift in consciousness, the way we think. Often we're very narrow in terms of how we think about things. And I think, just as you say, when you open your eyes to where you live, then you can find beauty, you can find other people that you may not have engaged with before, etc. And I think that's the beauty of your storytelling as well. And I was going to ask you, why storytelling? Why do you think storytelling is important? You know, in the I suppose in relation to what you're aiming to achieve in terms of personal, social, environmental change, etc.
So I think storytelling is very close to what it is to be human. It's been with us, from what I can understand, since the dawn of humanity, sharing stories. And of course and the mediums have shifted, or for the longest time it was just mouth to mouth, but then there was radio and others film. So I guess the main medium for telling stories today is, or one of the big ones, is by films. So establishing that storytelling equals watching films to an extent. You can go, if we circle back to Netflix or any other streaming service, or BBC or whatever you have to watch, where you can watch films. You can look through the what's on offer, and I bet you there's going to be some murder mysteries. There's going to be some dystopian future tales. There's going to be a lot of, so zooming in on documentaries, let's say, because that's what I do. A lot of the documentaries that you will see are basically picking up a topic and examining it, World War One, for example, and just looking at it and sharing to the audience how awful this thing is, and then putting it back down. So that's why, at least for me, sometimes if you see a documentary on an important topic at the movie theater, you leave with a pit in your stomach, because you've looked at this horrific thing and then it was put down, and that's the end of the film. And so storytelling for me, I want to do something different. I want to examine how can we look at this thing, how could it be different? How could we engage with this in a different way? So not just explaining what climate change is, but going deep into what would it require on a personal level. That's what I'm interested in. There are other levels that are very important. I'm not taking away anything from the UN or the global structural work. It's just that I feel, if I compare what I do to what the UN does, I truly do feel tiny, and I am tiny in that comparison. But if I look at my life and what could I do, that's what makes it exciting for me. So storytelling, I want to, and just picking up a newspaper and looking through all the articles, probably about 80% of it is horrific stuff that's going on in the world. And I'm not saying that we should stop reporting on horrific stuff that's going on in the world, but it's just that a newspaper gives you a false idea of the ratio of beauty and horrificness, if that's a word, that's going on in the world. And so I'd like to contribute to balancing that a little bit, in a tiny bit, in the way that I can, and showing some beautiful stories, showing some solutions focused stories that are that come from people that are just no different from you and I, just people being brave in a very human level of the word brave. So if we think of bravery, we might think of, I don't know, Batman or some on a level that's just, or even taking it down to the level of climate change, we might think of Greta Thunberg. And like, to be brave, you have to do something on that scale. And I'm proposing that being brave can be very different from that. Being brave can be deciding to work 4 days a week instead of 5, so that you can spend more time with your family, for example.
Yeah, I think that's, gosh, you've hit upon so many issues there that chime with us here. I think I think you're right. I think that we are faced with the horrors of what's going on, and let's not, not beat around the bush. That they are real. But as you say, there is a counterpoint to that, and there are people and things that are happening that are positive, and they do not get the airtime of the more negative things. And it was funny. I was watching your imprint thing, 13 Projects film, and there was one of it. I think it was in the imprint one. There's a young girl there who was doing sort of climate activism, and she was inspired by Greta Thunberg. And actually, I think there was a footage of her on a demonstration, and I think Greta Thunberg was in that as well, in that shot. I've got conflicted feelings, not about Greta Thunberg, but sort of, I suppose, climate celebrities. Not that it's Greta Thunberg's fault that she's been put in that situation, and sometimes they're needed to catalyse other people and inspire other people. But as you say, often they can come across as superheroes almost, as you say, that they're, oh, well, look, Greta Thunberg's doing it, but I'm not like that, and I don't, and I think it's problematic, as you say. I think people can make changes, not like Greta Thunberg on the international stage, perhaps, but sometimes people can be put off and be inspired, but that inspiration stops there because they think, well, I'm not Greta Thunberg. So I think that's really interesting what you said.
In that film that you're referring to, called Imprint, so yeah, note that Greta Thunberg is not the person who's in the film who's speaking. She's not the one we're putting the spotlight on. We're putting the spotlight on Melda, who was the first person to sit down next to Greta Thunberg on day 2 of the strike. So those people are heroes, or I don't know, heroes might be a word that's not so usable, but those people are important. The people that back up, the people that get like that stand up and say, I believe in that. That's also very, very important.
Absolutely, and I think that we can lose sight of for every Greta Thunberg, there's hundreds probably of people who are supporting her work and etc., and have done the miles as much as she has. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, my next question is I'm sure it's going to be difficult for you because I'm sure you will say all of your films, because you are so personally involved with your films and engaged with them. But are there some that have left a real, or your podcasts, not necessarily the films, that have left you with a lasting impression in terms of not necessarily changed your life, but it informed how you live?
Yes, all of them. Yeah. But to see if I can come up with an example, the last film that I released is called The Gift, and it's a Sami story. The Sami people of Sapmi, of the northern parts of Sweden, Norway, Finland. Yeah, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Russia, parts of the Russia also. And so the story is about a young Sami man who has dreamt of being a reindeer herder his whole life, and but even though he is Sami, so he has access to that world. Reindeer herding is not in his immediate family, so it's very difficult even for a Sami person to get into reindeer herding if it's not from within the family. So we have him, and then on a separate timeline we have an older couple who have been reindeer herders their whole life, and they don't have kids of their own, and they're coming up against retirement age, and it's the wear and tear of the body. It's a tough lifestyle. I don't know. Lifestyle seemed like the wrong word there, but you know what I mean. Yeah, it's a tough life. Maybe it's better. And somehow they hear of Daniel, this young man, and they get together, and they end up giving their entire reindeer herd to him. No strings attached. Just it's a gift from us to you. And in turn, this young man comes into this Sami village with the language that has died out in that particular village, the Ume Sami language, which the last language carrier in that village has passed away. So he comes in, he's 27 years old, speaks it fluently, and reinvigorates that part of the culture. And I mean, there's many things that have left lasting impressions there. But one of the first things I realized was that, because in talking to Daniel, he explained that, yeah, there's 5 varieties of the Sami language spoken in Sweden. And I realized that going through the school system in Sweden, I'd heard of the Sami language, but I had no clue that there were 5 varieties, and I didn't know a single word in any of them. And it just made me realize that the colonialism of the past, so to speak, is not in the past. It's in the present. It's part of the present school system, where we're taught, for example, the pre-Christian myths of this part of the world very thoroughly. You know, with Thor and Odin and Valhalla and all of that. It's a very important part of growing up to learn about that. But I hadn't heard anything about the Sami religion or beliefs pre-Christianity. Nothing. So that's one thing that really struck me. Like, yeah, the past is in the present. The history is in the present. So that was important, just to carry that, and to somehow try to be a tiny little bit of a useful spokesperson in the way that I can, and getting to know my own not my own culture, but the instead of just being enamored by North American indigenous people or Australian indigenous people or the Maori people, but to realize that, well, we have indigenous people in my own country, and maybe it's time to. I'm 52. I'm going to be 53. It's time, maybe past due, to get to know them and learn a few words and pay your respects a little bit.
And in doing so, people who watch that film will become aware of that, but also your daughter will as well. And, it's that knock-on effect. It's a beautiful film. I've seen it. It's absolutely beautiful. And the other thing I liked about it was keeping a tradition going, alive as well. It's such a beautiful story in that respect, that the match was perfect, between the couple and the young man. And keeping traditions, again, cultural traditions, economic sort of traditions alive in terms of reindeer herding. It's a beautiful film. It really is.
It was cold to make it, though, I'll tell you that.
Sorry? Oh,
It
I'm
was
sure.
cold to make it.
Yeah.
The camera
sure it
stopped
was.
working for a while, and then that was a sign that I'm about to stop working soon. Let's go inside and get some coffee. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. That really is. And have the old couple in that, they retired close by, did they? Or they stayed in the house that they were living in?
Yeah, they stayed in the house they're living in. It actually, so the ownership has transferred from them to the young man, the ownership of the herd, and the brand, the family brand of that you cut in the ears of the reindeer, that has been transferred, but they're still living in their house, and work alongside. So Daniel is not just coming in like, here are all these reindeer, good luck. No, they're working side by side for I don't know how many years, probably for as long as Leif can handle it physically, because that's his life. I think he would be miserable if he wasn't out with a reindeer. But it's probably a load off for him to not be in charge of it alone anymore, or with his wife.
Yeah, it's just another beautiful example of how one person or three people can make such a difference. Not only to their own lives, but to the community, or reintroduction of the language, etc., to that community. Beautiful, really beautiful.
And can you imagine what would happen to your mind if just putting on the radio each morning while you're having breakfast, like I do sometimes, and just hearing the news? Not to say that you replace all the news of the Ukraine. I'm not advocating to take away the reporting of what's going on. I'm just advocating for what would it do to your day and to your life if you hear these stories as well, just inspiration wise, not just to hear the oh dear, oh my gosh, like that sort of reaction, but also like a different kind of oh dear. Yeah.
Absolutely. This sort of one of the reasons, well, probably the main reason we set up SDG Vision is, sort of a Netflix or a YouTube channel that is just good stories, positive stories that, of people who are making a difference and contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'm with you on that. And I think, the younger generation really need to hear these stories. It's particularly important for them because it's their future at the end of the day. You alluded to digging up potatoes earlier on with your daughter, and I love that, and it sort of it reminds me of your inefficiency principle. Perhaps you'd like, I saw that on your website. Perhaps you'd like to tell us about what that principle is and what it means in your life, in your working and day-to-day life.
It's a very important principle. I'm not so good at following it always, but it's how to explain it. I mean, one way of explaining it would be to say, if you look at your life not from the present, what's going on-ness of it, but rather from imagining yourself on the deathbed type angle. And just, I mean, it's the old story of people interviewed on their deathbed regret that they didn't spend more time with their family and regret that they were working too much. So from that point of view, let's say in my career as a filmmaker, I could make 50 films, let's say. And if I really pushed really hard, maybe I could make 60. And if I took it a little easier, maybe I could make 45. I don't think at the end of the day, I think it makes some difference, but I don't think it's that important of a difference, whether I make 45 films or 60 films. It's much more important, how was I with my family? How was I with my children? What kind of a partner am I? How am I with the garden that we have here? With knowing where my food comes from, with preserving, taking care of the harvest here. How am I with those things? How am I with this place that's entrusted to me for a short while, where I live now? How do I interact with that? That seems to me much more important. And so keeping that in mind, the inefficiency principle, it's mainly just because I love the name of it. It's because everything you're told that you should be more efficient, you should cut down so that we can churn out more and more and more. And it's a built-in misunderstanding of what life is, I think. And I don't know if it started with the industrialization, but certainly it's got into like hyper gear with the industrialization. And also with the industrialization, let's say you had an oxen, is that the word? An oxen or an ox? Yeah, an ox to work your field, and suddenly you had a tractor with 100 times the capabilities. You would imagine that now you could work 100th as much and have the same income. But with every new thing, with every AI, with every efficiency thing that we have, with every update of the faster 5G, 6G internet, it seems we're working more and more and more. And some people are not working at all. And the people who are working, they're told to work extra and work harder and harder. So it's just something in that I'm trying to call out. and I'm not. This is a great opportunity to call it out to somebody else, because usually it's just me. This little mini company / organization is just me normally, running around doing all this stuff. But it is good to put some things down in writing, and putting that on the website felt good because it represents a reminder for me that if I want to take a day off, even though I quote should be working, or even though I quote have like the list of stuff to do which is full, but I want to go see a friend who's feeling down or whatever, or just go for a swim in the lake, or just go see my parents, or do something inefficient, I have an inefficiency principle to lean on. So it makes it easier. And also when the springtime and early summer comes around and it's just so much to do in the garden, and if I would just keep up my normal pace of making films and editing, I would be frustrated that I didn't have enough time to work in the garden and make sure the potatoes come out into the ground on time and all of that stuff. And having an inefficiency principle, which I highly recommend to everybody out there, just put one in your life somehow. You can lean on that and just say, today I'm doing potatoes and I'm having long coffee breaks. That's today. And I think you can do that and still make a lot of films, or whatever is the thing that you're working on.
It's interesting, I think, because I mean, you know, say you made 60 films rather than 45 films. Those 15 extra films, okay, that's quantity. In terms of quality, would they be as good as the 45 films that you made, having been rested? Assume the personal responsibilities and relationships you have with other people, and being a good father, a good husband, or partner. Tended your land, you know, your mind perhaps will be more relaxed, and you'll be more open and giving to the work, because you can focus purely on that without being distracted by, oh God, I've got to dig up the potatoes, I didn't speak to my daughter today, etc. So it's a richer process. I would suggest in the long run, perhaps. You know, I mean, if you're, as a creative person, if you're doing that all the time, you know, deadline after deadline after deadline, then that's going to surely impact your work, that stress level.
Yeah.
I think your inefficiency principle should be taken up by the United Nations. And, you know, as a principle that all human beings should must adopt.
I don't know about must adopt, but something to
Well,
put
no,
forth
okay, but it's highly recommended.
Yeah, just working a little bit less, just giving yourself time to bike to and fro work, for example, and just giving yourself time that you come home at 4 p.m. instead of 6 or 7 at night, so that you have time to cook a meal from scratch, for example. Even if you're not lucky enough to have potatoes from your own backyard, I mean, just to cook something from scratch instead of being stressed. That's what we're giving our children for the coming generations. That nutrition is more than just bodily nutrition somehow. The mom and dad are cooking together. It took them an hour, and now we're sitting down and we're lighting a candle. That I imagine that's important.
I'm pretty sure it is, and that's a beautiful thing, you know, particularly for children. You know, children are very sensitive, you know, and to be around their parents when they're both, the parents and them are engaged in the same things is so important, I think. And it's fascinating when you said, you know, that we were taught to believe that we were going to have more time. And, you know, I mean, I'm 59, and I remember, you know, when I was growing up, it was, there's going to be 2-3 day weeks, so you're working, there's going to be much more leisure time because of, you know, automation, etc. As you say, it hasn't worked out like that at all. In fact, the opposite, as you say. I mean, if you look at, you know, cooking a meal from scratch, as you say, you know, how many people do that these days? There's less and less people doing it. Now it's ready-made meals, etc. And almost that ceremony of cooking, which I think is so important. I was really fortunate. My mother cooked from scratch. But just that, I wasn't aware of it, but just the ceremony of cooking in itself was important to me as a child, I think. So, yeah, I think that's really interesting. Mattias, I don't know whether, before we approached you, I'm sure, I don't know, a lot of people aren't aware of it. Were you aware of the Sustainable Development Goals at all?
Yes, I was aware of them. Yeah, that's a short answer. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's fine. And I wonder, have they? Do you think they chime with your work, or do they inform your work, or have they been useful at all to you as a set of principles?
I think they chime. That's a good word. They do chime with my work, but it's more like my work is here and the goals are here and they chime. I'm not really in that equation somehow. I didn't. They haven't been important for me entering into this world. It's almost as if, from my perspective, the goals are a little bit more of the Excel spreadsheet type. They're coming into the world through that way of interacting with the world a little bit, and which is important. But it's not. It's not my way of dancing. It has a different rhythm to it that I'm not so good at. So I got started with this because I mean I had felt my whole life since I was a child that something is wrong in the world, but I wasn't able, of course, as a child to pinpoint what's wrong, why is it wrong, how could it be better. You're just a child and you're just part of what's being presented to you. But then when I was maybe 40, something like that, I read a book by an author, an American philosopher and author named Charles Eisenstein. And the book was called The Ascent of Humanity. And it takes up this question, like what's wrong with the world? How did we get to this point? And it breaks it down in a way that just spoke to me beautifully. And I mean, it's a really thick book with a lot of information, so it's kind of doing it a disservice to just break it down to one sentence. But so I'm apologize for that. But so it basically leads down to we humans think of ourselves as something other than nature, something outside of nature that can interact with nature, that can go out into nature, that can pollute nature or restorate nature or do things with nature, but we don't fundamentally think of ourselves as part of nature or as nature ourselves. But if you break it down, if you look at it, whatever way you look at it, you must come to the conclusion that we are nature. We are also part of everything else. And reading that book, I was in the film industry already. I was making documentary films for Swedish National Television, and I was doing client work and more of a regular filmmaker. And reading that book, it just opened up all the doors right back down to the 8-year-old me that had all these questions about why are things like this, and just answered a lot of those questions in such a beautiful way. And that's what made me want to start Campfire Stories and do things in a different way, work in gift economy, meaning that I produce the films that I do in the podcast as a gift to whoever wants to receive them, and then the people who want to gift back monetarily or otherwise can do so. I open doors for that gift to travel back to me as well, so that I can continue doing it. So that was more of a mythopoetical entry point, I guess, as opposed to reading the bullet point list of these are the things that's wrong, these are the things we need to do to change. Again, I'm not saying that's not accurate or important, but it's just not my vernacular that I speak fluently. I can translate it, but I have a different way of being inspired.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because I think that we thought that your work really does relate very much to the Sustainable Development Goals. So even though you haven't used that as a framework really for your work, because as you say, that's not the way your mind works or your creative process works.
But that's why I say it does chime. It does chime.
Yeah, I
But
see. Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't have so much credit to take for that. I guess I do, but it's it's happening without me trying to make it happen.
Sure. No, absolutely. No, you talk about your sort of gift economy, Your website is. Could you give us the address for your website, perhaps, so people can find out more about your films?
Sure, it's campfire-stories, plural stories, .org. And,
okay, and your Patreon, you've got a Patreon page, I think, as well.
It's true, patreon.com/my name, which is Mattias Olsson, with 2 T's and 2 S's.
That's smashing. Yeah. That's lovely. And one question that I didn't ask, but I think I don't need to ask it really, but I think it's nice to bring it out. I was going to say, why Campfire Stories? But it seems to me that it's a nod to the past when people were sat around a campfire talking and sharing stories. Is that the reason behind it?
Yes and no. When you said it now, I wanted to say yes, because that just seemed like a much quicker way of explaining it. But the way I will explain it now will take a little bit longer, but maybe it's worth it. Yeah. The name kind of came to me as an image or a sequence of images where I imagined. So in the book that I mentioned, The Ascent of Humanity, Charles Eisenstein uses the word of leaving the old story and heading towards a new story, and being in the whited out part of the map between the old story and the new story, and trying to figure out what the paths are. So I guess that came from his book also, that I was imagining, being with one foot firmly planted in the old story. That's all I've ever known culturally. But then just trying to imagine what a new story could be, or would look like, or smell, or feel like, and just trying to leave the old story and get to the new one. So I imagined that I would wake up one morning and just put my hiking boots on and just leave whatever it was that I was waking up in, and just start walking. And that I would just keep walking, and eventually I would get to a mountain, and I would just go up the mountainside, and I would just keep walking. And then when I got really tired, I would stop and realize that I was lost. I had no map, I had no compass, I had no clue where I was going. And then stopping and feeling a little bit disheartened by this, but then turning around and looking and just seeing the smog hanging over what I had left. And then realizing, even if I'm lost, I'm still on the right track. And then being strengthened by that realization, and to keep going up that mountainside. And then I imagined that there would be other people also out hiking, and that perhaps we would decide to pitch our tents together one evening, and just make a fire and have a chat and heat up our dinners and talk to one another. And so that's the campfire that I have in mind, or that I had in mind when that name came to me. So yeah, you see, that's a bit of a longer story. I think I'm going to adapt your way of saying it. It's much faster, much better talking point.
No, but yours is much more poetic and I think actually much more powerful. So I'm really glad you did take the time to talk about it. And we're really glad that we're hiking with you and walking alongside you and around your campfire, our campfire.
Yeah.
And we look forward to many more films that you're making that will enrich our journey. So thank you very much, Mattias, for joining us.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the beautiful work that you do. And thanks for having me.
Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you, Mattias. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Now, if you enjoyed that, go and have a look at their film and many, many others on sdg.vision.